The second video on chapter 10 is going to cover apostrophes and quotation marks. So first I want to talk about quotation marks. The primary usage of quotation marks has to do with punctuating dialogue. Dialogue is when characters in your writing are speaking or having a conversation. If you are using someone's exact words, using a direct quotation, you need to indicate that it's someone else's words by marking those words with quotation marks. So for example, Simon said, "Your voice is appalling." I want to give credit to Simon for using these exact words. So the way that I indicate those are his words is I surround everything he said with quotation marks. So I put quotation marks in front of his first word, your, and after his first word, appalling. Okay, so that's step one in punctuating dialogue. You need to surround the words with quotation marks. The second rule when you're punctuating dialogue, or the second step, is you have to separate what's called the identifying tag, which tells the reader who is speaking those words. You separate those words from the quotation with a comma. We'll talk a moment about what to do if this comes at the end of the sentence. The punctuation changes a little bit. The third part of punctuating dialogue is that you have to capitalize the first word that the character said if what the character said is a complete sentence. And in this case, voice is, this is a complete sentence, so this should be capitalized. And then finally you need ending punctuation. Because this sentence is a statement, I would put a period at the end, and you always put the punctuation inside of the quotation marks, with one exception, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the period would go right after the word appalling, but before the quotation marks. So if I were typing this, I would type ing period quotes, okay? Now, this changes a little bit if instead of the identifying tag coming at the beginning, it comes after the words that were spoken. So if I have, "Your voice is appalling," Simon said, I still separate the identifying tag from the quotation marks with a comma. But in this case, it would need to go here. As I said before, the punctuation always goes inside of the quotes, so the comma would go right here. I still need to punctuate the ending of my sentence. Now the last word of my sentence is going to be the word said, so the period would go right there. If instead of having a statement, what I have is a question, then the punctuation would change slightly. So for example, if Simon asked, "Is your voice terrible?" Again, I would surround what the character said with quotation marks, so I would put them in front of his first word, after his last word. Now, what he is saying is a question. I need to indicate to my reader that this dialogue, or those spoken words, are a question. By putting a question mark at the end of his sentence, punctuation always goes inside the quotation marks. So the question mark would go right there. I still need to punctuate the end of my sentence with a period. I said before there's one exception to the punctuation going inside the quotation marks. That is when, and this gets a little bit complicated, if I, as the writer, am asking a question about something someone else said, then the punctuation changes slightly. So let me show you an example to help make sense of this. I, as the writer, am asking, did you really say potatoes are disgusting? What the person said was potatoes are disgusting, so I put quotation marks around to indicate what that person said. But what she or he said is not a question, it's a statement. I, as the writer, am asking the question. So to show my reader that I am the person asking the question, not the person who spoke, I put the question mark outside the quotes. Because it's not what this person asked, it's what I, as the writer, am asking. Okay? This is also true if instead of asking a question, you're saying something exclamatory or making an exclamation. So for example, coming back up here, if Simon yelled, "Your voice is terrible," I would mark what he said with quotations, which I have, but I need to tell my reader that Simon was yelling, so here I would put an exclamation point and still a period at the end of my sentence. So coming back to this strange thing that happens when the punctuation, the only time the punctuation is outside of the quotation marks, if I as the writer am yelling or being exclamatory, but what the person said is just a statement, then I would indicate that by putting the exclamation point outside of the punctuation. For example, how dare you say potatoes are disgusting? If I am exclamatory about this and I'm upset about it, but this person was not, I would indicate that by punctuating my sentence with the exclamation point rather than what this person said. We'll practice this more. It doesn't come up that often, but it's important for you to be aware of. So those are all examples of using double quotation marks. There is some time when you will use what's called a single quotation mark, and that has to do when you are quoting what someone said, and in what that person said, they quote someone else. So let me show you an example. Mike asked, "Do you remember when Dr. King said, 'I have a dream'?" First, I need to indicate the words that Mike used, the words that Mike spoke. So I put quotes in front of his first word and after the last thing he said. Just like before, separate the identifying tag with a comma. Now, he's asking a question, so I would put my question mark there, but he's also using someone else's words. If you are using a quote inside of a quote, then you need to indicate that with single quotation marks. So what the words Dr. King used were, "I have a dream." So I would use just single quotation marks. And then of course separate that with a comma. So if you use dialogue inside of dialogue, the way you indicate that is just with a single quote, which on your keyboard you would use an apostrophe is the key that you would type. Okay, so that's how you punctuate dialogue when you are using someone else's words in your writing. There are two other reasons when you would use quotation marks in your writing. The first one has to do with if you're using the title of a book or some work that's shorter. We'll talk about this more, but if you are using the title of a longer work, you italicize it or underline it. If you're using a shorter work, like a poem, the name of a song, the name of a chapter within a book, then you put quotes around it. So for example, if you have a song title, you mark the title by surrounding it with quotation marks. The title of the song in this sentence, my favorite song is Two Step by Dave Matthews, is Two Step. The quotes go around the title of the work because it's shorter. Okay? The final reason that you would use quotation marks outside of dialogue, titles of shorter works, is if you are purposefully using slang or a really technical term, then you would surround that with quotation marks to indicate to your reader that you recognize it's slang that you're using. So for example, and forgive me because slang doesn't come to me easily, but so if you have, he really wants to be homies with that other guy. Think about if you would do this with your fingers when you're talking because you're kind of indicating you're using a strange word or a slang word. In your writing, you would mark that with quotation marks showing that you're not using a typical word, you're using something that's more slang. Okay, so that covers quotation marks. Let's now talk about apostrophes. There are two reasons that you would use an apostrophe in your writing. The first one has to do with a contraction. A contraction occurs when you take two words and you combine them into a single word, and in so doing, remove some of the letters of those two words. So for example, if I have the words can, not, and I join them into one word, what I have is can't. So cannot contracts to form the word can't. An apostrophe indicates to your reader where the missing letters would be found within the contraction. So if you look, the missing letters are this N and this O. So I would indicate to my reader that those letters went right here, but I've purposefully left them out in my contraction. Let me give you one more example. I have she will, that can contract to form she'll. These are the letters that are missing, the W and the I. I indicate where those letters are missing by putting the apostrophe where the letters would otherwise go. So that's contraction. That's one reason that you would use an apostrophe. The only other time you would use an apostrophe is if you are showing possession. Something belongs to someone else or something else. So for example, if the car belongs to Jerry, the way that I show to my reader that the car belongs to someone else is I put an apostrophe to indicate the car is Jerry's. Okay, here's one more example. If the claws belong to the cat, I would put an apostrophe to show. I would add apostrophe S to that noun to show ownership, that the claws belong to the cat. This is true when what you're dealing with is a singular noun, one person, one thing. If you're dealing with a plural noun, then the apostrophe goes in a different place. Let me show you an example. In this case, the collars belong to the dogs, and dogs is plural. The way I show to my reader that I have possession that belongs to something that's plural is the apostrophe goes after the S. That tells the reader I have more than one dog to which the collars belong. So when you have a plural noun, it's S apostrophe. Okay, singular noun is apostrophe S, plural noun is S apostrophe. There's an exception to this, however. If your plural noun does not end in the letter S. So for example, children is a plural noun. It means more than one, and the clothes belong to the children. Because children does not end in an S, then I don't need to put the apostrophe after the S. I would put apostrophe S. The only time it comes after the S is when the plural noun ends in the letter S, but plural children does not end in the letter S. So we'll practice all of these concepts more in class and in preparing for exams and such. But as a review, this topic covered quotation marks as well as apostrophes and the usages for both.